For those who don't know me, my name's Graeme, and as was mentioned earlier, I am a psychologist, and my pronouns are he, him. And this morning we're looking at a very, very difficult passage. And given the unbearable heat of today, perhaps it's quite an appropriate passage. A feeling of hellfire and end days seem to be hanging over us in the air, particularly when you look at some of the news around the place. Now, as some of you might expect, I do have some photos or some memes to show. Not too many this morning. There's not too many memes I could find that would be appropriate for this passage this morning. But I've got a couple, so thank you. Yes, my warped sense of humour. This one speaks to my age, I think. Anyone ever seen a movie with Dudley Moore called Holy Moses? No? It probably speaks to my age. And that's effectively a scene from that movie. Take a minute with that one. Might be a little bit obscure for this morning's passage, but as we go through the passage this morning, perhaps that'll make a bit more sense. So keep that one in mind as we go through this morning. Another final one. We finally made it to the first of the clobber verses, y'all. Yes. We come now to one of the main clobber passages that's been used to condemn anyone who might be homosexual. But let me start by saying that this passage actually has nothing to do with homosexuality. And we'll uncover this as we journey through the story, approaching the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah and unpacking the truths in the story. Now, I don't often do this, but today I'm going to issue a content warning for the sermon. There will be topics raised that will be extremely distressing to some people. So again, I would reiterate what we say at every service, that if you want to talk to someone, members of the pastoral care team and leadership team and small group leaders are available to chat with. And don't be afraid about seeking professional support if needed. If you need guidance on how to access professional support, talk to me or someone from one of the teams and we'll help. It is a bit scary. It's a very scary passage that we're looking at this morning. But hopefully by the time we get to the end of the passage, we'll realize it's actually not that scary and it has something else to teach us. In the passage we read from this morning, it begins by introducing to us two angels who approached the town of Sodom. They had just come from speaking to Abraham, where they told him that they were sent not to destroy these towns, but according to Genesis 18, 20 to 21, to do some investigation and see whether the reports of their wickedness were true. We're not told at this stage what their wickedness was, only that they would see it through their investigation. So, let's go on this journey with these angels and take a look at this town that they were approaching and follow their investigation. They were approaching two towns that were extremely wealthy. Their wealth was unmatched throughout the known world. The reports were that there was nothing material that they lacked. One might assume that if they had such wealth, then they would be able to provide great hospitality. Surely people like this would be hospitable without comparison. Surely, with such prosperity, people would be clamoring over each other to provide and to prove that they were the most hospitable and had the finest of everything to show off. So, the angels go to the city gate, intending to see if anyone would show them hospitality. Now, just for a bit of context, this was the usual thing for strangers in a town to do. It was expected that at the very least, no matter who you were, you would find hospitality in a city. And it was expected that if you had the resources, no matter what god you worshipped or what your culture was, you showed hospitality to strangers. That was simply the basic expectation at the time. Now, before we get to Lot taking them in, let's take a look at the wealth of these cities. It's pretty important to understand where the wealth comes from. Sodom and Gomorrah were built either around or next to what would have been a giant tar pit. Now, pitch and tar were essential in the ancient world. It was used for waterproofing, building ships, production of weaponry. It was an extremely valuable commodity. And Sodom and Gomorrah had the monopoly on tar and pitch in the ancient world. That was the source of their wealth, not unlike the oil barons of today. But to process it, they required immense heat, something to burn that created a high temperature. Luckily, the area was also geologically rich in sulfur, referred to as burning rocks. Let's just take a moment to think what it would have been like to live in a place like that. Yes, they would have been very, very wealthy, but there had been poisonous fumes everywhere, a foul stench of oil products and sulfur. It would have permeated everything: hair, skin, nostrils, clothes, food. Everything you touched would have been covered in some kind of oil product. Probably worse than living on an oil rig. Now, when I say that they had the monopoly here, I'm not just talking about a few barrels a year. I'm talking a huge, monumental amount requiring a humongous industry. They supplied much of the known world with tar and pitch, and the processing of that much tar and pitch would have raised the temperature in and around the town to unbearable levels. Think it's hot today, multiply it and live in it every day with no air conditioning. It would have been like living in a literal hell. And of course, they didn't have anything like OH&S like we do today. People dying from accidental oil blasts or falling into the tar pits, people dying from inhaling too much sulfur. You get even a paper cut when it's fatal. Now, imagine what that environment might do to you. To say you'd have to be tough to live in a place like that would be a complete understatement. Environmentally, it would have been the equal opposite to the Garden of Eden, and that you might see in Genesis chapter 2. The environment might have created a lawless society where graft and corruption and murder flourished. They would have been suspicious of any strangers. Are they coming to steal our wealth? Are they going to act honestly like Lot and his family and undercut our corrupt monopoly? They would have done unspeakable things to gain the next contract or to run their competitor out of business. No way are you going to show hospitality to someone who could, by tomorrow, have your business and your wealth. Not a nice place to be, and certainly not a nice place if you're a stranger to spend out in the open. So, Lot begs the angels, these strangers, to come to his house and accept his hospitality. And this is where we see the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah and the righteousness of Lot described in the previous chapter. In Ezekiel 16, verse 49, we read, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy." Nothing there about anything sexual, so we know there's nothing here in this passage to do with sexuality. It's about hospitality. They had all this wealth, but they did not share it. No one else with all their wealth and prosperity offered hospitality to these strangers except Lot, Abraham's nephew. That was the investigation of the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah by these angels, kind of an undercover operation. If no one took them in, then the report of their wickedness must be true. The point being that even when you're going through hell, if you truly are a child of the living God, it's expected that you will still act with kindness and love and show compassion and share what resources you have. And in that, I'm reminded of the stories of people in concentration camps who, even in their living hell, shared their resources with those who needed it. It's easy to do it in the Garden of Eden where everything is perfect, or to do it when life is wonderful. But could we do it in the worst of places? That's what we're expected to do. Now, in the earliest accounts of the Sodom and Gomorrah story, the story ends there. The rest of the story that we read this morning is considered a much later addition by many theologians. And the rest of the story bears a remarkable similarity to the story of the Levite's concubine in Judges 19, another one of the clobber passages. It's possible that some have even suggested that the two stories are in fact the same story, just in different contexts. So let's now take a look at the rest of the story that we read from this morning, because it goes beyond simply not offering hospitality. And here's where I remind you of that content warning at the beginning of the sermon. In the next part of the story, the beginning of the part that everyone remembers, we find Lot's household surrounded by the men of the town. They want Lot to surrender the strangers so that they may know them. Now, yes, that does mean perform sex acts, but that's not homosexuality. Bear with me here. Let's go back to our understanding of the living conditions of Sodom and the brutality of the people as a result. Remember how we said that to live in that environment, people would have done unspeakable things to prove dominance? That's what we see here in this passage. What the men of Sodom were wanting to do was to gang rape the strangers. Why? Not because they were sexually attracted to them, or because they wanted sex, or because they even liked having sex with men, but because they wanted to exert control. They treat the strangers as inhospitably as the environment in which they live. Now, you don't need me to tell you that throughout time, sexual violence has been used to control and prove dominance over people, to humiliate people. Not that much different to today's society. And it is way more prevalent than I suspect most people would ever imagine. So much so that, and I'm going to be a bit controversial here, so much so I would dare say that most men today don't even know what sexual violence is, because it's our culture and how we've been raised. It's seen as normal. It's what we experience in the locker rooms and changing rooms as children. It's what we see on TV. It's what we see all over the internet, just as it's been right throughout history. Take a look at the ruins of Pompeii and see the normalized depictions of sexual violence shown everywhere. Just read accounts of any military conflict, past and present, and we see such violence being used to humiliate and control. It's been normalized in schools, universities, and training facilities, calling it hazing. And anytime anyone says anything, the answer is, that's just how it is. Just watch any edition of the news nowadays and we see that it's part of so many industries, including finance, military, entertainment, and sadly, even the church. In so many industries, to get ahead, to get that promotion, there's a level of some kind of sexual violence that people are forced to endure. Make no mistake, none of that has anything to do with homosexuality. No more than the rape of women defines heterosexuality. It's about dominance and control. What the men of Sodom do is take their lack of hospitality supernova. They want to prove that righteous Lot is so impotent that he can't protect those in his care. And they want to demonstrate to these strangers, don't F with us or we will F with you. That's basically what they're saying. Does any of that sound familiar? People exerting dominance for their own gain? We see it so often that we almost don't recognize it. The people who exploit the environment, those who exploit workers with poor working conditions, those who swindle workers out of wages, those who refuse to show mercy or hospitality to people who are struggling, those who refuse to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to comfort the bereaved, those who seek to deny social security to those who need it most, those who insist on conformity and enforce things like conversion therapy or deny support that's required for people to be their genuine self, those who exclude for any reason whatsoever, be it skin color, race, gender, sexuality, economic status, whatever. The list goes on and on and on. They are the Sodomites of this story. Has nothing to do with sexuality. Full stop. They are the people that this story is talking about. And there's nothing here to be emulated or admired, and certainly it would be unthinkable to vote for anyone or support anyone who embodied such behavior. Yes, they may be wealthy, but that's nothing to be admired. And if we find ourselves in a situation where we are around such people and have nothing to do with them, certainly don't try to join them. And so we come to the final part of the story. Lot and his family are told to flee from the town because it will rightly be destroyed. Now, we don't exactly know how the towns were destroyed. Given the environment, it could have simply exploded with an ill-timed spark. Either way, the scene might have been similar to Pompeii. People engulfed in debris and turned into statues as the place was destroyed. Now, I'm sure many of us have seen the statues of Pompeii, of the people in Pompeii, and if you squint just a little, what those statues look like is very similar to what a pillar of raw salt looked like in ancient times when it was transported across the desert. That's probably what happened to Lot's wife. She became like a pillar of salt. Well, why? Well, according to the passage, we're told that she looked back. But perhaps a better understanding of the phrase is she went back. She went back to that hellhole. Perhaps she liked the wealth and power and prestige. Perhaps she thought she could marry one of these other alpha types and finally gain the wealth and power that she never could with righteous Lot. Perhaps she wanted to save some of her wealth. We don't know. But in going back, she shared the fate of the inhabitants. Now, the story says it was a woman, but it could easily have been anyone else. It could have even easily have been a male that had done that. When we're given the opportunity to leave a destructive environment, don't go back to it. Don't go back. Whether it's a relationship or a job or even a church congregation, don't go back. We are each so important, so individual, so unique and so loved that we deserve to be saved and safe. Don't go back to where you might be overcome and may not make it out again. And certainly don't try to join them. Speak up against them, yes. Speak truth to power, yes. But don't try to join. This story has nothing to do with sexuality. Rather, it's telling us that to be righteous is to express hospitality and love. To be a child of God is to love. 1 John 4, 7 and 8 says, Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. How do we love? It's not just in showing hospitality. That was just the example that was used in this passage. Perhaps a more modern rendering of hospitality can be seen in Matthew 25, 37 to 40, where we read, Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. That's showing the hospitality and love.